Chapter 180. Nie Xiao and the others, who had been teased by Zhang Xiaohua, were no longer in the mood to watch the competition in the arena. They stayed for a while longer before leaving. Zhang Xiaohua watched them stagger away and couldn't help but feel a little guilty. He thought to himself, "Did I go overboard?" The dazzling arena in Kitty Hawk Hall finally regained its calm. Leader Chung also heaved a sigh of relief. Steward Su must have seen the commotion in the morning. He didn't know if his handling was appropriate, if his response was steady, and if it could enter Steward Su's discerning eyes. The other children in the audience were very happy. Anyone who was surrounded by a group of people wouldn't feel good. Moreover, this group of people was their opponent's support group. Now it was good. The sky was high and the clouds were light. It was quiet, and they could concentrate on the competition. Putting aside Zhang Xiaohua's guilt, Leader Chang's nervousness, and the children's relaxation, when Nie Xiao and the others staggered out of Kitty Hawk Hall and turned at the intersection, they immediately straightened their backs. Someone said, "I didn't expect this Zhang Xiaohua to be so difficult to deal with now. I originally wanted to get some information out of him and make him leak some information. In the end, he was even more difficult to deal with than He Tianchu. He just kept his mouth shut, but he used 3 words to exchange for 8 sets of sword techniques." Another person also said, "That's right. Zhang Xiaohua is no longer the same as before. He's no longer the country child we just met. That's right. The way he was bullied by Ma Jinger back then is still vivid in my mind. That's right. He also needs to grow and mature. If he still looks like he's being bullied, can he still survive in Jianghu? If he doesn't wash up early, it's better for him to go home and farm." That's true. However, after being played by this kid, I always feel uncomfortable. Brother Xiao, do we really have to each teach him a set of sword techniques? Nie Xiao nodded with a sinister smile on his face. He said, "Why not? We've already promised him. Why don't we teach him?" "Forget it. This is not the image of the wise second brother in our hearts. Hurry up and tell us, what good plan do you have?" Before Nie Xiao could say anything, he let out a complacent laugh, causing everyone's hearts to itch even more. Seeing everyone's anxious looks, Nie Xiao said slowly, "We said that we would teach Zhang Xiaohua swordsmanship, but we didn't say how. There are many ways to teach, and teaching by example is just one of them. Besides, with Zhang Xiaohua's comprehension, if he was still the same as before, he would forget 8 out of 10 moves you taught him. We would be exhausted to death. Also, we only talked about teaching him, but we didn't say that we have to teach him. I think there are 2 ways. First, he would practice 2 sets of swordsmanship in front of him. Who cared if he could learn it or not? The second was to find a few sword manuals and throw them to him so that he could read them by himself. This was also a way to teach martial arts. In short, he has a good plan, and I have a way out. What can Zhang Xiaohua do to us?" Everyone clapped their hands and praised him. Only then did they happily puff out their chests and leave. Zhang Xiaohua from fledgling Eagle Hall did not know that he had been schemed against again. He was still secretly feeling guilty for going overboard. Alas, the older the ginger, the spicier it was. There was no need to deceive him. Zhang Xiaohua's remaining matches, to be honest, were really not worth mentioning. Although his opponents were different, his methods were the same. His guerrilla tactics were the same. Naturally, the results of the matches were the same. This time, Zhang Xiaohua understood that he had just passed the first stage. He asked curiously, "Leader Chang, I only came to Huanxi Manor to participate in the martial arts exhibition. It has nothing to do with the advancement of your Misty School's disciples. Will I also participate in the next 2 stages?" Leader Chang nodded and said, "Ever since you participated in our group's competition, I specially checked the previous records. Although there hasn't been an outsider participating in the martial arts exhibition in the past few decades, there were still many outsiders who participated enthusiastically 100 years ago. Moreover, there were also many people who entered the 2nd and 3rd stages. However, there is one thing that I have seen in the records. These outsiders who advanced were mostly people with a certain amount of fame in the Jianghu. After joining the Lotus Escort Agency, they participated in the martial arts exhibition. Their martial arts skills were quite high and their results, to be honest, were much better than yours. Zhang Xiaohua nodded and didn't deny his results, saying, in other words, I have to participate in tomorrow's competition. Leader Chang smiled and said, Of course. Why else would I remind you? However, according to your results, it's fine if you don't participate. In the next two stages, the first stage is limited to the time it takes for 3 incense sticks to burn, and the other stage is unlimited. Your method of competition may not be advantageous anymore. In any case, you were able to pass the first stage, which is already not bad. I suggest that you don't need to pass the next 2 stages. That's right, the 2 disciples from the Lotus Escort Agency who came with you to participate in the martial arts exhibition have already withdrawn from the competition yesterday. In fact, Zhang Xiaohua didn't know that there would be a competition tomorrow and didn't intend to compete with this group of children for a place. However, she had just received the pharmacy hall's token from He Tianshu this morning. If she didn't compete tomorrow, she would probably have to return it tonight. Thinking of the heaven and earth Yuan Qi in the pharmacy hall, Zhang Xiaohua was a little reluctant to part with it. Moreover, this leader Chang was really too much. It's fine if you didn't tell me that there would be a competition tomorrow, but you first told me and then advised me not to participate. Isn't it just because my matches are always tied? Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua was a little unhappy and asked, Then, if I participate and enter the top 10, won't I take up another place in your Kitty Hawk Hall? Leader Chang was very fond of Zhang Xiaohua, asking this kind of question that didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. It was a good opportunity to test his knowledge. He said, No, it's recorded very clearly in the records. If you can enter the top 10, you will be given a place alone. Our Kitty Hawk Hall disciples will still choose 10 disciples. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she said resolutely, Then I'll come back tomorrow to participate. Oh? Leader Chang was a little surprised and said, Are you sure? Zhang Xiaohua frowned and said, Of course I'm sure. It doesn't matter if I lose. If I win, I can still compete with the commoner second stage disciples. I won't lose anything, so why wouldn't I come? When Leader Chang saw that Zhang Xiaohua had decided, he didn't try to persuade her anymore. He told her to come to Kitty Hawk Hall as usual tomorrow. Only then did Zhang Xiaohua say goodbye and leave. After leaving Kitty Hawk Hall, Zhang Xiaohua's first thought was to go to the medicine hall. However, after thinking about it, her second brother was still in Misty School. She had no reason to go anywhere else first. She could only follow the original path back to Zhang Xiaohu's residence. The door to Zhang Xiaohu's small courtyard was still closed. Zhang Xiaohua walked to the door and knocked on it. When there was no response, she impatiently shouted, Second brother, it's me. As expected, the door opened. Zhang Xiaohua walked in and said unhappily, Second brother, do you have to close the door every day? If they keep coming to flatter you, are you going to close the door for the rest of your life? At this moment, Zhang Xiaohu's face was covered in sweat. He wiped it slightly and said, I don't know either. I'll just close the door first. My martial arts are too inferior right now. I can't raise my head in front of others. I really don't have any better ideas, so I can only do this. Only then did Zhang Xiaohua notice that her second brother's head was covered in sweat. She asked in shock, Second brother, why are you sweating so much? What are you doing? What am I doing? Zhang Xiaohu bitterly smiled and walked to the empty space in the courtyard. He practiced the 6 harmonies fist technique that he was proficient in. Zhang Xiaohua didn't dare to disturb him. She sat on the small stone stool and watched quietly. However, after watching for a long time, Zhang Xiaohu struck again and again without stopping. His sweat flowed down like water. Zhang Xiaohua felt that something was wrong and shouted, Second brother, stop and rest for a while. However, Zhang Xiaohu turned a deaf ear to her words. When Zhang Xiaohua saw this, he became anxious. He jumped up from the small stone stool and jumped into the range of Zhang Xiaohu's moves. Using his left hand to block Zhang Xiaohu's fist, he used his right hand to execute the fist of the North Star and attacked Zhang Xiaohu's side. When Zhang Xiaohu saw his younger brother's fist close in, he didn't reply and swung his fist to meet it. Zhang Xiaohua didn't avoid the stiff collision. He felt that his second brother's fist was very heavy. It seemed like he was really going to use his full strength. How could Zhang Xiaohua be afraid? His hand also became heavier, so the two of them started fighting. After fighting for the time it took for 2 sticks of incense to burn, Zhang Xiaohua didn't feel that it was too strenuous. After all, his arms were very strong now. He didn't need to use any inner strength to punch. On the other hand, Zhang Xiaohu was different. In the past, he had inner strength as a foundation, but now, he had completely abandoned the low-level inner strength cultivation method. Now, he was relying on his physical strength to fight with Zhang Xiaohua. How could he be Zhang Xiaohua's opponent? If it wasn't for Zhang Xiaohua intentionally going easy on him, Zhang Xiaohu would have been knocked to the ground by his younger brother. Seeing that his second brother's fists weren't as heavy as they were at the beginning, and that his face was already showing signs of fatigue, Zhang Xiaohua didn't dare to continue fighting. He showed an opening under his armpit, just in time to meet Zhang Xiaohu's fist. With a pong sound, Zhang Xiaohua was sent flying. He cried out, "Io!" This cry of pain fell into Zhang Xiaohu's ears. He immediately stopped fighting and ran over to Zhang Xiaohua. He carefully helped him up and anxiously asked, "You're injured under your armpit, right? How is it? Does it hurt a lot?" When Zhang Xiaohua saw his second brother's anxious appearance, he secretly laughed in his heart. However, he didn't dare to reveal any flaws. He only furrowed his brows and said, "Second brother, I was kind enough to spar with you. How could you be so cruel? I'm your biological younger brother. Even if your martial arts are high, you shouldn't bully me like this. Io, it hurts." Zhang Xiaohu hurriedly smiled and said, "Xiaohua, it's all my fault. I'm in a bad mood today and wasn't careful. Take a deep breath and see if your chest is stuffy. If it's not, let's hurry to the medicine hall. I don't want to hurt you." Zhang Xiaohua deliberately took a deep breath and then exhaled. He closed his eyes for a while and said, "It's fine, second brother. It doesn't seem like my chest is uncomfortable. It's just that the place you hit hurts. AI, second brother, what's there to be in a bad mood about? You're being so cruel to your own younger brother. Oh right, you're sweating all over. Have you been practicing since this morning?" Zhang Xiaohu thought for a moment and then silently nodded. Zhang Xiaohua touched his armpit and said, "Second brother, help me over. Let's sit on the stone bench and talk." Zhang Xiaohua looked hurt, so Zhang Xiaohu could only carefully help him over to the stone bench. After sitting down, Zhang Xiaohua said, "Second brother, I've been competing all day. Can you give me some water to drink?" When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, he silently brought out a teacup and tea from the room. Zhang Xiaohua took it and poured out 2 cups of tea. She handed it to Zhang Xiaohu and said, "Second brother, you drink some too?" Zhang Xiaohu looked at Zhang Xiaohua and said, "You drink too?" When Zhang Xiaohua picked up the cup, Zhang Xiaohu drank it. Both of them drank the water and put down the cups. Zhang Xiaohua then asked, "Second brother, what's going on? Who told you to practice non-stop since you came back?" Zhang Xiaohu looked up at the sky and seemed to be thinking about something. Then, he poured a cup of tea and said as he drank, "Actually, little blossom, it's nothing. It's just that sigh. It's just that I feel very useless. Look at you. You didn't have a master and you didn't learn the fist techniques completely, but you still persevered in practicing martial arts and pieced those incomplete fist techniques together. You actually succeeded in practicing them. Moreover, look at your current level of martial arts. Even the disciples of the ethereal sect aren't a match for you. You're much stronger than me. Please add it to your collection. Thank you." Chapter 181. Zhang Xiaohu really had a heavy burden on his mind. During his time in the Misty School, he was in a very difficult situation. Many of the righteous disciples thought that he had entered the Misty School through nepotism, so they treated him neither coldly nor warmly. Some even spoke ill of him. On the other hand, there were those who wanted to curry favor with him, which made him feel extremely disgusted. But even if he hated them, he had just entered the Misty School. He really didn't know where they came from, so he didn't dare to offend them. Therefore, his days in the Misty School were very difficult. He had no choice but to close the door. And these difficulties in dealing with people and relationships were just side effects for Zhang Xiaohu. The key was that after when Wen Hai brought him into the Misty School, he didn't care about him and just let him live and die on his own. They had met a few times before, and he had asked Zhang Xiaohua for the reckless bull force. Later on, they had distanced themselves from each other. Even if they did meet, he wouldn't talk about martial arts training. This made Zhang Xiaohu very puzzled. and he couldn't understand his master's thoughts. Time passed bit by bit, until today, when he saw Zhang Xiaohua show off his invincible might in the arena and fight evenly with the Misty School disciples. Zhang Xiaohu's mixed feelings were completely overturned. Zhang Xiaohu had always thought that he had good luck and was more talented than his younger brother, so he was ahead of him in the path of martial arts training. But today, he realized that he was wrong, very wrong. His younger brother had long since run ahead of him, leaving him far behind. He had an indescribable feeling in his heart. If one were to say that he was jealous, perhaps there was a little, but this was after all his younger brother by blood. Zhang Xiaohu saw his improvement and was mainly shocked and self-pitying. Thinking about his own situation, thinking about his stagnant martial arts, he seemed to feel a kind of suffocation. Yes, it was as if an invisible hand was choking his neck, making it hard for him to breathe. Zhang Xiaohu did not like this feeling. In order to vent his frustrations, he went back to the small courtyard and shut the door. He buried himself in hard practice, practicing the 6 harmony fists that he was best at. Only when he continuously practiced the 6 harmony fists like the palm of his hand, did he have some confidence to comfort his hurt heart. As for the reason for his injury, Zhang Xiaohu had to admit from the bottom of his heart that it was really not because he saw that his younger brother's martial arts were stronger than his. It was because he felt from the bottom of his heart that his martial arts were too low. His character and appearance were ordinary. His background was lowly. He really could not take out anything that could catch the eye of that person. As such, how could he attract the attention of others? The more Zhang Xiaohu thought about it, the more his heart ached. And the more his heart ached, the more he couldn't stop his hands. He only stopped when Zhang Xiaohua knocked on the door and called him. His whole body was covered in sweat, as if he had just been fished out of the water. Zhang Xiaohu's reason was very far-fetched, but also very practical. Zhang Xiaohua didn't know how to answer him. If it was any ordinary martial arts, he would definitely pass it on to his second brother without hesitation. But what he had learned, other than the Big Dipper magical fist, were all from Misty School. Sect Leader O had made it very clear that he couldn't pass it on to others and could only practice it himself. And what he relied on in the arena, other than the ethereal steps, was the Big Dipper magical fist and the strength of his 2 arms. To Zhang Xiaohu, these were things that couldn't be replicated. The dark night sky was actually so beautiful. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohu felt a bit guilty and said, "Xiaohua, you've already been healed for a month, but second brother only just saw. AI, second brother didn't take good care of you." If the two hadn't seen each other for a long time, Zhang Xiaohu wouldn't have paid attention. However, Zhang Xiaohua had just come over a month ago, and she had been with him for the past 2 days. He actually didn't see her. This was something that Zhang Xiaohu didn't want to forgive himself. However, Zhang Xiaohua waved her hand and said, "It's nothing, second brother. I've grown up and can take care of myself. You're not in an unfamiliar environment right now, so you should take care of yourself first. Looking at your appearance just now, it was really scary. You're not the same as when you were in the Lotus Flower Escort Agency. I remember that when you first learned the 6 he fists, you were very confident. You used this fist technique to compete with other people's bodyguards, and you never lost. Why are you so discouraged now?" The speaker didn't mean it, but the listener did. Zhang Xiaohu's heart moved when he heard this. That's right. Back then, he had nothing. He didn't have a master or a sect. He only had someone teach him the simple 6 he fists, and he could learn it with relish. Moreover, he was proficient in the 6 he fists and dared to challenge the strong. But today, he had already entered the Misty School and found the master that he had always dreamed of. There was a path to heaven in front of him. Although his master hadn't taught him anything, based on the foundation of the Misty School, even if they didn't teach him any secret techniques, it would definitely be 100 times better than the 6 he fists or the trash internal strength that he had cultivated. He felt sorry for himself because of a little neglect, blamed the heavens and blamed others. He didn't even pay attention to his younger brother's injuries. Was such a Zhang Xiaohu still the same person? Could he cultivate to a high level of martial arts with such a mentality? Even if he cultivated to a high level of martial arts, could he still be happy? Moreover, if he only cared about himself and didn't care about others, would he be able to win someone's heart? A series of self-questioning caused Zhang Xiaohu's expression to constantly change. In the end, a smile appeared on Zhang Xiaohu's face. He had really thought it through. Whether it was martial arts or power, they were just a part of life. Family and friendship were the key to life. If he treated martial arts and power as his everything, then he would lose the joy of life. The true meaning of life was nothing more than enjoying life. Using martial arts and power as embellishments in life, whether others praised or belittled them, they shouldn't affect his magnanimous heart. Only in this way could he truly control his own life. Seeing Zhang Xiaohu smile, Zhang Xiaohua was a little surprised. She asked, "Second brother, what are you thinking about? Why are you so happy?" Zhang Xiaohu still smiled and didn't say anything. He said, "It's nothing. It's just that when I thought about how your right hand has recovered, the stone in my heart also fell. I don't have to worry about you anymore." "Oh, right. How was the result of your competition today? Don't tell me it's still 3 draws. Zhang Xiaohua scratched her head embarrassedly. She said, "Second brother, can you think of another result?" Zhang Xiaohu chuckled and asked, "Then you're not going back to Huanqi Mountain Villa today, right? Are you going back early tomorrow morning?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled mysteriously. She said, "You guessed wrong, oh?" Zhang Xiaohu was surprised. He looked up at the sky and said, "It's already late. It's not appropriate for you to go back now." Zhang Xiaohua shook her head again. Zhang Xiaohu was puzzled. Chapter 182. The leader looked at Zhang Xiaohua as though he was looking at a monster and muttered, "What an idiot." Then he said angrily, "Are you going up or not?" At this moment, a voice came from behind. "Of course I'm going up." Zhang Xiaohua turned around and was overjoyed. It was really Zhang Xiaohu who was rushing over with a ladder on his back. The leader stared blankly as Zhang Xiaohu ran to the front of the stage and leaned the ladder against the side of the stage. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and nodded at the leader. She walked to the front of the ladder and walked up to the stage. When Zhang Xiaohua walked up to the stage, the leader came to his senses. He pointed at the ladder leaning against the stage and couldn't believe his eyes. He stuttered, this. In his hurry, he didn't know what he was saying. It was no wonder. Ever since he entered the Misty School, participated in the martial arts exhibition, and became the leader of the Misty School, he had never seen a Misty School disciple walk up to the stage using the ladder. The word ladder didn't exist in the minds of the Misty School disciples. The disciple on the stage also looked at everything that was happening below the stage strangely. When Zhang Xiaohua really stood in front of him, he suddenly came to a realization. He pointed at Zhang Xiaohua's nose and said, You don't know Qinggong?" Zhang Xiaohua nodded solemnly and said in all seriousness, "Yes, I haven't learned Qinggong yet." The disciple's lips curled into a contemptuous smile. After the two of them greeted each other, without waiting for Zhang Xiaohua to prepare, the disciple rushed forward and attacked with his fist. Zhang Xiaohua was also shocked. She even forgot to use the ethereal steps and only knew to raise her fist to meet the attack. A few days ago, in the first 9 matches of the martial arts exhibition, Zhang Xiaohua usually used the fist of the Big Dipper to attack and ethereal steps to dodge. Therefore, it was always a draw. But today, she was caught off guard by her opponent's attack. She naturally reacted by using the fist of the Big Dipper that she was most familiar with. The fist of the Big Dipper only had 36 defensive moves. In the past, Zhang Xiaohua felt that there weren't many defensive moves. Ever since she learned the ethereal steps, most of her defensive moves were dodging using the ethereal steps. But this time, she was forced to only use the fist of the Big Dipper. Only after half an incense's time did Zhang Xiaohua wake up from her opponent's continuous attacks. Just as she was about to slide and use the ethereal steps, a thought suddenly appeared in her mind. If she only used the fist of the Big Dipper, how long could she last? Zhang Xiaohua wanted to know the difference between her fist of the Big Dipper and other people's fist techniques. Therefore, she abandoned the ethereal steps and focused on using the fist of the Big Dipper. A person's potential was forced out. In the beginning, Zhang Xiaohua was clumsy left and right. She blocked left and right and was very passive. She could only counterattack once in 10 moves. There were a few times when she was hit by her opponent's rough skin and flesh. She almost fell down. There was a time when she almost fell off the stage. When the disciple saw that his attacks were effective, he put in more effort in his attacks. He wasn't stingy with his internal energy. After half an incense stick's time, Zhang Xiaohua gradually adapted to her opponent's attacks. Gradually, she began to counterattack. The Fist of the Big Dipper originally had many offensive moves. In the past few days, her opponents had avoided her and didn't show the power of the Fist of the Big Dipper. Her opponent's attacks in this incense stick's time was like a baptism for her fist technique. It allowed Zhang Xiaohua to grow. Her strength and moves became more coordinated and subtle. But seeing that the second incense stick was already half-burnt, Zhang Xiaohua became braver and braver as the battle went on, gradually turning the situation around. The one who was the most surprised was Zhang Xiaohu. After all, he understood Zhang Xiaohua the most. Moreover, he had been watching Zhang Xiaohua's matches for the past few days. At the beginning, when he saw that Zhang Xiaohua was beaten silly by her opponent, she actually forgot her specialty, ethereal steps. He was secretly worried that if she wasn't careful, Zhang Xiaohua would be kicked off the stage by her opponent. He secretly prayed in his heart that she should hurry up and use the ethereal steps. Hurry up and use the ethereal steps. Hurry up and use the ethereal steps. However, Zhang Xiaohua's performance was beyond his expectations. Not only did she not use the ethereal steps, she only used the Fist of the North Star to face her opponent. Just like a bamboo in a rainstorm, no matter how heavy the rain was, it could only slightly bend her waist. As long as the rain did not decrease, she would immediately straighten her back. Although Zhang Xiaohu was not an internal force expert, his understanding of fist techniques was far greater than Zhang Xiaohua's. He gradually became more familiar with fist techniques. Gradually, he began to understand. His sharp senses felt that Zhang Xiaohua's control of the Fist of the North Star was becoming more and more precise. Zhang Xiaohu could not help but nod his head. Battles were indeed the best way to grow. On the stage, Zhang Xiaohua's opponent became more and more alarmed as he fought. The situation of the battle was beginning to spiral out of his control. Moreover, the inner force in his body was almost exhausted. After all, he was only a disciple of the Misty School's Kitty Hawk Hall. He had just attained the first rank of Cotton Robe, so how could he have any profound inner force? He stole a glance at the second incense stick under the stage. It was already more than half. Thinking about how he had spent so much time facing his worst opponent, how would he face his future opponents? Moreover, he also noticed that Zhang Xiaohua's fists were beginning to slow down. Her forehead was also covered in sweat. He knew that Zhang Xiaohua was also at the end of her tether and was gradually losing her strength. In fact, when comparing inner force to physical strength, inner force naturally had the upper hand. Not only was there a lot of techniques in the use of inner force, it could be used to attack flexibly, but physical strength could only be controlled. Inner force could be tempered through the veins, the deeper it became, but physical strength was not easy to increase. Most importantly, inner force could be quickly recovered through the regulation of inner force cultivation methods, but physical strength recovery was not easy. At this moment, he could not help but regret. If he had put in more effort to cultivate his inner force, Zhang Xiaohua would have run out of strength, and he would have been able to win easily. Just as he was thinking, he had forced Zhang Xiaohua into a corner. Zhang Xiaohua was also gasping for air, as if she was about to sit on the ground. Thus, he was delighted. He took a deep breath and secretly channeled the last bit of inner force in his veins. With a wave of his hands, he covered Zhang Xiaohua's body with his palms and attacked Zhang Xiaohua. He believed that in such a small corner, whether it was attacking or defending, Zhang Xiaohua would inevitably come into contact with his palms. Looking at Zhang Xiaohua's appearance, his last bit of inner force should be the straw that broke the camel's back. He looked forward to the clash of fists and palms, as if he could already see the dawn of victory. Moreover, just as his palms were about to hit Zhang Xiaohua, he suddenly felt his vision blur, and he had actually lost sight of Zhang Xiaohua's figure. But he had already used up all his inner force, and his inner force hit empty air. His body was already out of control. He had already forced Zhang Xiaohua to the corner of the stage, and when he reached the edge of the stage, when Zhang Xiaohua dodged, he had already reached the edge of the stage. The forward momentum brought him out of the stage, and he cursed in his heart. He immediately gathered his qi and wanted to use his qinggong to return to the stage. But now, his meridians were like a thief leaving a building, empty. There was not an ounce of inner force that he could use. He could only watch helplessly as he fell off the stage. He heard two plop, plop sounds, and Zhang Xiaohua's opponent had thrown himself off the stage. As for Zhang Xiaohua, she had also used up all her strength and sat down on the stage. It was a close call just now. Her opponent had used all his might, and Zhang Xiaohua indeed did not have any extra strength to block it. Unfortunately, although Zhang Xiaohua's strength was not enough to block that palm which was filled with inner force, she was still able to use ethereal steps. Hence, Zhang Xiaohua used the last of her strength and used ethereal steps to flash behind her opponent. At this moment, below the stage, the second incense stick had just been extinguished. The leader looked at the two people who had fallen off the stage and announced, "Number 250 wins." When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, he happily ran to the side of the stage. Zhang Xiaohua, who was on the stage, was also unusually excited. But he raised his hand with great difficulty and still stood up weakly. Zhang Xiaohu walked along the escalator and carried Zhang Xiaohua down with a pained heart. He brought her to the side to rest. Luckily, there was still some time before the second round of the competition, and they could let the competing disciples rest. Otherwise, with Zhang Xiaohua's condition, she could only admit defeat. As mentioned previously, the recovery of inner force was through regulating one's breathing. At this moment, there were quite a number of contestants who were sitting cross-legged. They were using this gap in the competition to quickly circulate their inner force to recover as much inner force as possible. As for Zhang Xiaohua, seeing that others were regulating their breathing, Zhang Xiaohu said to Zhang Xiaohua, who was sitting on the ground paralyzed, "Xiaohua, you don't have any strength left. What are you going to do next? Why don't you rest here, and I'll go see where you are competing. We'll just admit defeat. Anyway, you have already won a match just now, and it has long exceeded our expectations. I thought you would be beaten down in half an incense stick's time." Zhang Xiaohua tried her best to move her legs and said, "Wait a little longer. Let's see how much strength I can recover." Zhang Xiaohua could feel that her strength was slowly recovering, but this speed was far from enough. She estimated that by the time the other party finished regulating their breathing and was ready to go on stage, her strength would not even be half recovered. What should she do? Just as he was panicking, his mind lit up as he thought of something. He struggled to help Zhang Xiaohu stand up and slowly took up the horse stance. He slowly began to execute the Big Dipper mystical fist. Zhang Xiaohu was stunned and quickly stopped him. "What are you doing? Xiaohua, you're already so tired. Why don't you rest more and try to recover more strength? Why are you still practicing the fist technique?" Zhang Xiaohua said weakly, "Second brother, don't worry about me. I think this will help me recover my strength." It turned out that Zhang Xiaohua wanted to use the usual method of practicing the Fist of the North Star to recover her strength. However, on one hand, Zhang Xiaohua had never used this method to recover her strength before, so she did not know if it would work. On the other hand, she had just practiced the Fist of the North Star to the third level and needed 7 consecutive times to flow. In this short period of time, she did not know if it was enough for her to finish 7 times. In any case, if she simply waited here, she would definitely not be able to recover her strength and would only end up admitting defeat. But if she practiced the Fist of the North Star, there might be a glimmer of hope. For this glimmer of hope, Zhang Xiaohua was willing to gamble. Seeing that all the disciples who were regulating their breathing had stood up and walked towards the arena, the people in the arena had also started calling out numbers. Zhang Xiaohua had just slowly practiced the second round. When Zhang Xiaohua was about to perform the last move of the second round, a shout came from the arena, "Number 250, number 250? Zhang Xiaohua wanted to give up, but Zhang Xiaohu also shouted from the side, "Xiaohua, they've already called you." Zhang Xiaohua gritted his teeth and said, "Second brother, go and delay for a while." When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, he looked at him, then looked at the arena, and hurriedly ran over. However, Zhang Xiaohua was already in despair. It was still far from the 7th round. How could second brother delay for so long? However, Zhang Xiaohua did not want to give up. He gritted his teeth and started practicing the Fist of the North Star for the 3rd time. However, when he performed the first move, that familiar, longing, and long-awaited life-saving flow was produced from his left toe. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. He immediately produced a kind of power from his body. He used all his strength to practice the Fist of the North Star, driving the flow throughout his bones. The flow was like a nourishing elixir. Every time it flowed through a bone, it would drive the flesh and muscles connected to the bone, restoring their vitality. Chapter 183. Zhang Xiaohua's opponent. That little abacus was loud and clear. A person's strength was sometimes exhausted and naturally could not last long. Zhang Xiaohua was naturally no exception. However, this endurance was different from person to person. Zhang Xiaohua's previous match was because she had used too much strength at the beginning. In the end, she almost died. In this match, naturally, she was very careful in the distribution of strength. Seeing that the opponent was blindly wandering, she used even more feints. From the beginning of the match, there were 7 real moves and 3 feints. Later on, there were 7 feints and 3 real moves. In the end, there were 10 feints. Since you are not attacking, why should I go all out? In addition, Zhang Xiaohua had just practiced the Big Dipper magical fist. Her body was full of strength and was stronger than when she first went on stage. How could this kind of state be exhausted in 2 or 3 incense sticks? Thus, on the stage, there was a scene that made Zhang Xiaohua incredulous. Zhang Xiaohua actually chased her opponent around the stage. Although people with discerning eyes could see clearly that this was called a wandering tactic, like a swallow shuttling back and forth on the stage, avoiding Zhang Xiaohua's fists. Her figure was also beautiful, but after all, she was defending. Her momentum was weaker, and the situation was not good. Zhang Xiaohua did not show off her qigong footwork. Compared to her opponent, she was clumsy. However, she seemed to be unskilled and had a valiant taste. In this way, the two of them fought as they walked. As they walked, they fought for nearly an incense stick's worth of time. Although qigong did not require much internal strength, it still consumed internal strength. Otherwise, Zhang Xiaohua would have practiced qigong long ago. After an incense stick's worth of time, the disciple who was competing with Zhang Xiaohua was already sweating on his back. On the other hand, Zhang Xiaohua was also panting heavily. The disciple was happy when he saw this. His strategy had begun to work, and Zhang Xiaohua had expended a lot of energy. Originally, when the disciple saw that more than half the time had passed, he thought that if his strategy didn't have any obvious effect, he would change his method of attack. However, when he saw that Zhang Xiaohua's footsteps had slowed down, he couldn't help but feel happy. He took a deep breath and circulated the internal energy in his meridians. His body became even faster, and he continued to move. He firmly believed that Zhang Xiaohua could only hold on for half an incense stick of time. When Zhang Xiaohua ran out of strength, it would be the time for him to pick the fruits of victory. Sure enough, Zhang Xiaohua did not disappoint. Her footsteps became heavier and her breathing became heavier. The disciple patiently waited for half an incense stick's worth of time. When he calculated that it was about time, he let out a long whistle and stopped his flying steps. He laughed and said, "Idiot, you've been fooled. Watch me." After saying that, he turned around and leaped up. His left and right legs kept changing, alternating between kicking at Zhang Xiaohua. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she grinned, revealing her white teeth. Her footsteps no longer moved. Her legs were slightly separated, and she lowered her waist. She was actually in a horse stance. She raised her fist and punched towards the shadow of the leg that was flying towards her. Pong, pong, pong. There were a few consecutive sounds, like the sound of leather being beaten. The shadow of the leg that was filled with internal energy collided with Zhang Xiaohua's fist that was filled with strength. Zhang Xiaohua's body was as steady as a mountain. She didn't move at all. The shadow of the leg was like flowing water that hit a pillar. After several impacts, it didn't have any effect. When the disciple retracted his body and stood firmly on the spot, His legs couldn't help but tremble slightly. He actually felt pain in his legs. On the opposite side, Zhang Xiaohua also loosened her fists and swung her hands. It should be the same feeling as her opponent. The disciple looked at Zhang Xiaohua and said in surprise, "You still have the strength to receive my shadowless kick? You didn't use much strength just now?" Zhang Xiaohua chuckled. Her face looked harmless and said, "You guess? You guess? Why don't you guess?" After speaking, she didn't wait for the disciple to reply. She leaned forward and raised her fist to attack the disciple's chest. The disciple thought it was a feint and wanted to dodge, but when the fist got close to him, it contained strength and the wind from the fist was biting cold. The disciple's face changed, and he immediately raised his palm to meet the fist. When the fist and palm met, his body swayed. Only then did he know that Zhang Xiaohua had used all her strength. When Zhang Xiaohua saw that her fist was blocked, she didn't stop. She closed in with another move, forcing the disciple to immediately receive the attack. He couldn't even move. The disciple made a move, and every move fell behind. Zhang Xiaohua also took advantage of her strength to bully others. She pressed forward with her fists, forcing the disciple to use all his strength to deal with each move. Zhang Xiaohua's fist technique had been honed over this period of time, and was no longer as inexperienced as before. Even if Nie Xiaoer were to fight now, he would not be a match for Zhang Xiaohua just by relying on his previous 4 ounces against 1,000 jin. Furthermore, this disciple's internal energy was even more incomparable to Nie Xiaoer's. Zhang Xiaohua's arms now had an unknown amount of strength, but it was enough to deal with him. Therefore, in the last half an incense stick's time, the disciple was really suppressed by Zhang Xiaohua. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she looked up to the sky and laughed, saying, "Ha ha ha, character is a problem." When that youth saw this, he hurriedly took a few steps away with an expression that said, "I don't know him." Zhang Xiaohu was also listening to the side. He smiled and congratulated Zhang Xiaohua. "Xiaohua, congratulations, you're really lucky to pass another round." Zhang Xiaohua stopped laughing and said to Zhang Xiaohu, "Let's go, second brother. Let's rest on the side. There's still a competition later." Thus, the 2 brothers returned to the previous place. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua sit down, Zhang Xiaohu was a bit puzzled and asked, "Xiaohua, you're not using your Big Dipper magical fist anymore?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Second brother, I'm not tired at all. After a little rest, I'll be able to recover my strength. Just now, don't think that I was forcing him to fight on the stage. I only used my strength in the last few moments. At the very beginning, I was just using my flowery frame to fool him." At this time, they heard a dang sound from the side. Zhang Xiaohua and his brother turned around to look. Wasn't it the disciple who was fighting with Zhang Xiaohua on the stage? He must have heard Zhang Xiaohua's words and fainted on the ground. The 2 brothers stayed outside the stage, chatting while paying attention to the movements inside the stage. After a while, the competition inside the stage ended. Many disciples also came over to sit down and rest, adjusting their internal strength. After another period of time, the 3rd round of the competition began. As the number was called, the disciples outside the stage gradually walked into the stage. However, Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu did not hear the unpleasant number being called. Even after a long time had passed, Zhang Xiaohua and the others did not hear it. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua shouted, "Oh no, second brother, this competition will be considered as forfeiting if we don't see it." Could it be that we didn't hear it? Don't lose the opportunity for nothing. Zhang Xiaohu was also anxious and said, "I didn't hear it either. I guess we missed it. Let's quickly go in and look for it." However, on the stage, there seemed to be a competition, and no one was waiting for anyone. Zhang Xiaohua was anxious and said, "Second brother, it seems that we really missed it. They didn't wait for us at all. Sigh, it wasn't easy to enter the 3rd round. Why did we forfeit? I don't know who benefited from it." Zhang Xiaohu said, "But we also paid attention. We really didn't hear the number 250 being called. This number sounds very unpleasant, so there's no reason not to hear it." Zhang Xiaohua was also puzzled and said, "Yes, I think so too." At this time, they just happened to pass by a stage. Zhang Xiaohua pulled the leader and asked, "Martial uncle, Can I ask why I didn't hear my number being called? What's going on? The leader was focused on the competition in the stage and did not have the time to pay attention to him. He said absent-mindedly, "You lost." So naturally they didn't call you. Zhang Xiaohua said, "I didn't lose. The leader said that I won." The leader said casually, "Then it means that you didn't hear it. It's considered forfeiting. You're unlucky." Zhang Xiaohua wanted to cry and said, But, I really didn't hear it." Zhang Xiaohu also chimed in, "Yes, I also paid attention. I really didn't hear it." The leader slightly turned his face and said, "I don't have time. You should ask Steward Su." Steward Su? When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he immediately came to a realization. He pulled Zhang Xiaohu and ran towards the largest stage in the field. Sure enough, from afar, he saw Steward Su watching the competition with great interest. Zhang Xiaohua walked closer and saluted. "Steward Su?" Steward Su looked at the youth and didn't seem to recognize him. He couldn't help but ask, "You're from Fledgling Eagle Hall? Why haven't I seen you before?" Zhang Xiaohua carefully explained that, "Steward Su, I'm from Huanxi Manor." Oh, Steward Su understood and said with a smile, "I know. You were sent by Huanxi Manor to participate in the martial arts exhibition." Hee, how was it? The martial arts exhibition wasn't bad, right? The second round of the competition was much more exciting than the first round. What do you think? Zhang Xiaohua smiled apologetically and said, "Yes, it was really exciting. The level was very high." Steward Su said proudly, "Of course. Which disciple of our Misty School's Fledgling Eagle Hall isn't a dragon or phoenix among men? However, it's also not bad that you can participate in the first round of the competition. Regardless of the outcome, the most important thing is to participate. The competition is second, friendship is first. The friendship between Misty School and Huanxi Manor will last forever." All right, you really have time. There's nothing going on at Huanxi Manor, and you can actually go from the first round to the second round. Zhang Xiaohua knew that Steward Su had misunderstood and explained, "It's like this. Steward Su, I also entered the second round." Steward Su's eyeballs almost fell to the ground and said, "What did you say? You entered the second round?" Then he seemed to think of something and said, "Oh, you're really not bad. However, the second round is full of elites. If you lose, then you lose. Come, stay here with me and take a good look at how others compete. It will definitely be useful for you to learn from. Go back and practice martial arts well, and strive to win a few more rounds next year." Zhang Xiaohua still wanted to explain and said, "It's like this. Steward Su, I have already won 2 rounds in a row just now." 2 rounds? Steward Su was stunned. He was shocked and said in disbelief, "You really won 2 rounds in a row?" "Really?" Zhang Xiaohua said with a face of certainty. It was announced by the leader. "Congratulations, number 250. You've successfully entered the 4th round." "4th round?" Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled and said, "But I haven't participated in the 3rd round." Steward Su saw that Zhang Xiaohua didn't understand and explained, "You got a bye in the 3rd round and directly entered the 4th round?" "Bye?" Zhang Xiaohua was even more puzzled and asked, "What's a bye?" "A bye means I don't have to compete?" When Steward Su heard this, he thought to himself, "What kind of level is this? He doesn't know anything and his luck is quite good. Sigh, I can only teach him a lesson." In the second round, there are a total of 250 disciples. In the first round, there are an even number, so you can catch pairs to compete with each other. In the second round, there are a total of 125 pairs, which is an odd number, so you can't catch pairs to compete with each other. Therefore, there is a disciple who doesn't need to compete with each other and can directly enter the 3rd round. This is called a bye. In the 3rd round, there are still 63 disciples, so there must be a disciple who doesn't need to compete with each other and can directly enter the 4th round. Zhang Xiaohua exclaimed, "There's such a thing? My character can't be that good. Otherwise, the 4th and 5th round would be a bye." Steward Su shook his head and said, "The 4th round has 32 people. It's an even number, and naturally there's no need for a bye. The 5th round has 16 disciples and doesn't need to compete anymore. Even if it's a competition, there's no need for a bye." Chapter 184. Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu discussed the serious issue of character as they walked back slowly. Since he knew that he would be able to enter the fourth round safely and easily without having to do anything himself, why wouldn't he do it? Zhang Xiaohua was in an incomparably relaxed mood. It was rare for him to hum a country tune. Zhang Xiaohu listened carefully. "Sister, you sit at the bow of the boat. Brother will walk on the shore." He couldn't help but be stunned and thought to himself, since when did Guozhuang House have such a song? Why haven't I heard of it before? When the two of them returned to their original spot, the third round of the competition was nearing its end. Many disciples were hiding at the side to adjust their breathing. Zhang Xiaohu was envious and said softly, "Xiaohua, look at how good they are. They are so young, and yet they have the opportunity to practice the profound inner force mantras and exquisite fist techniques. When we were so young, we were still busy helping father and mother in the fields." Zhang Xiaohua didn't think much of it and shook her head slightly. "Second brother, everyone has their own path, and it's not the same. They may have a glimpse of the mysteries of martial arts, but they also lost the opportunity to enjoy the happiness of being with their family. As the ancients said, between gains and losses, who knows if it's a blessing or a curse?" She then comforted Zhang Xiaohu and said, "Now, second brother, look, you have your hero one to teach you martial arts. As for me, I have my own fist of the North Star and ethereal steps. Yes, there's also the reckless bull force that you gave me. Compared to when we first came to Pingyang City, it's a world of difference. As a person, one must be content with what one has." Zhang Xiaohu nodded and said, "Yes, no matter what, we are bumpkins from the countryside. It's not easy for us to come this far. It's better to have a grateful heart." Zhang Xiaohua turned to look at Zhang Xiaohu and said, "It seems that second brother understands." "That's right." Zhang Xiaohu let out a long sigh and said, "Whether I want to or not is not a problem. Whether I can think through it or not is a very realistic problem. Since Master accepted me as his disciple, he naturally taught me martial arts. Otherwise, he wouldn't have stood up in front of so many people. There must be a reason for this period of neglect. I'll just be myself. Who cares about the vicissitudes of life in this world?" "Good job, second brother." Zhang Xiaohua clapped her hands and praised. Then, "Do you still want to close the door to your courtyard?" Zhang Xiaohu's face was calm as he said, "Closed is open, open is closed. Why bother about it?" "What?" Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled. "If it's closed, then it's closed. If it's open, then it's open. How is it as contradictory as you say?" Zhang Xiaohu also explained in a low voice, "You will naturally understand in the future." While the two brothers were talking, they heard another round of numbers being called out in the field. The last round of the second round of the martial arts exhibition had finally begun. Zhang Xiaohu patted Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder and encouraged her. "Xiaohua, this is already the last round. Do your best. Whether you win or lose, you have left a solid footprint in the martial arts exhibition." Zhang Xiaohua patted the dust off her butt and grinned. "Second brother, just watch me." Before the two of them reached the field, they heard a drawn-out voice from inside. "Number 250, where are you? Come quickly." Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu looked at each other and quickly ran inside. Now that the martial arts exhibition had entered the last round of the second round, there were only 32 disciples in the entire Kitty Hawk Hall who had advanced. The last round of the competition started at the same time, and there were only 16 matches. In other words, there were only 16 matches in the arena. Naturally, these arenas were all concentrated in the center. At this time, there were already a lot of people gathered around these 16 arenas, and they were all looking forward to the exciting matches. Zhang Xiaohua responded as she ran towards the arenas inside. Zhang Xiaohu also followed behind, but when he passed by the arena where the previous match had taken place, he was still very careful. He ran over and carried the escalator on his back. What a joke! This was a necessity for Zhang Xiaohua to enter the arena. As her second brother, if he didn't worry about it, who else could he count on? Although Zhang Xiaohua didn't learn Qinggong, this guy's running speed wasn't slower than others. When Zhang Xiaohu turned around again, he had already disappeared. Fortunately, the square was filled with little radishes. With Zhang Xiaohu's height, he wasn't afraid that he couldn't find Zhang Xiaohua's figure. Of course, look over there. Isn't that Zhang Xiaohua? She stood anxiously under the arena, looking left and right, waiting for the magic weapon to enter the arena. Zhang Xiaohu hurriedly pushed aside the disciples who were watching the fun. Under everyone's surprised eyes, he placed the escalator on the arena. Seeing this situation, a burst of whispers burst out. Needless to say, they were all talking about the function of the escalator. Zhang Xiaohua's face had never been as red as it was today. She secretly made up her mind that the first thing she would do when she returned to Huanqi Mountain Villa was to quickly master this qigong. Otherwise, she couldn't afford to lose face when she went out. Under everyone's gaze, Zhang Xiaohua walked up the escalator to the arena. Zhang Xiaohua's opponent for the last round had already been waiting on the arena. This was a young man who looked very simple and honest. His body was muscular, and he was also very tall. He was even taller than Zhang Xiaohua by a head. If Zhang Xiaohua didn't know that only he, Shang Guanyun, and Yu Dai were wildcards, she would have already gone forward to ask about the origin of the opponent. When Zhang Xiaohua stood on the arena, the leader under the arena shouted, "You can start?" So the disciple opposite Zhang Xiaohua cupped his hands and saluted, and said in a low muffled voice, "I'm Tang Shi, a disciple of young Eagle Hall. Please take care of me, senior martial brother." Zhang Xiaohua naturally also cupped his hands and saluted. Then the two of them made a fighting pose. When Tang Shi saw that Zhang Xiaohua was ready, he said, "Senior martial brother Zhang, I'm a little strong. Please be careful." After saying that, he raised his big fist and smashed it towards Zhang Xiaohua. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she laughed in her heart and thought, "This Tang Shi seems to be the same as Shernyo. They both practice external martial arts. Looking at his personality, he must be a straightforward man like Shernyo." During Zhang Xiaohua's martial arts practice journey in the Misty School, all the opponents she met were all inner disciples who were good at internal martial arts. Zhang Xiaohua thought that external martial arts had withered away in the Misty School and it was difficult to find outstanding disciples. Unexpectedly, she met one in the last round. She didn't need to think to know that the opponent in front of her must be extremely outstanding. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to enter the last round of the second round with just external martial arts. However, Zhang Xiaohua was also very proud of her strength. Seeing the opponent's fist approaching, she didn't dodge. She also leaned forward and clenched her fist to meet it. That Tang Shi's fist was actually bigger than Zhang Xiaohua's fist by a size. With a pong sound, the two fists collided. A huge force came through, and Zhang Xiaohua's body was unsteady. She took 4 steps back before she could steady herself. Slightly shaking her sore arm and wrist, Zhang Xiaohua looked at the opponent in front of her again. That Tang Shi was also surprised. His previous opponents were all senior and junior brothers who he was familiar with. Almost all of them dared to exchange blows with him. Even those disciples who had profound internal martial arts were the same. The unfamiliar disciple in front of him looked very weak and actually dared to exchange blows with him. To be honest, he was afraid that he would injure his opponent and had already reduced his strength. However, Zhang Xiaohua wasn't injured and only took a few steps back. As for himself, he also took 2 steps back. The key point was that Zhang Xiaohua only shook her hand, but Tang Shi felt that his wrist and fist were already somewhat numb. Tang Shi also raised his head and looked at the unremarkable opponent in front of him again. The two people's gazes met on the stage, and sparks flew between them. Seeing the surprise, respect, and dissatisfaction in each other's eyes, the two people suddenly felt that heroes cherished heroes. Shortly after, the two people slightly narrowed their eyes and shouted at the same time. Both of them quickly stepped forward, and their fists collided. The crowd below the stage heard nearly 10 consecutive pong 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 sounds on the stage. When they looked again, the two people on the stage had already pulled apart a certain distance. Both of them were using their left hand to continuously massage their right hand. Their mouths were breathing in cold air with a hee-hee sound. Presumably, both of their right hands were in pain. Seeing such a situation, the crowd below the stage couldn't help but be surprised. The sound of discussion once again rose. What kind of person was Tang Shi? How good was his martial arts? The disciples below the stage and the leader had a thunderous reputation. However, This time, the opponent was using this method to force him to the point where he couldn't gain the upper hand. Hence, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes turned, and he withdrew the Big Dipper magical fist. His footsteps suddenly became graceful and his body became light. He used the ethereal steps and followed Tang Shi's moves, evading them in an incomparably elegant manner. Zhang Xiaohua's switch from offense to defense didn't cause any reaction from the disciples below the stage who hadn't fought with him. Those disciples who had suffered under his ethereal steps had faces full of grief and indignation. They all said, "This bastard is at it again. It's that despicable and shameless footwork again." And the disciple who had fought with him in the second round was also present. He was in even more pain as he shouted loudly, "Plagiarism, plagiarism, plagiarism again." Roaming defensive tactics were indeed not uncommon in the martial arts exhibition. However, this was only limited to the first round. The second round didn't have a draw. If one was always at a disadvantage, even if it was a draw in the end, it would still be considered a failure. And the disciples who had entered the second round were all outstanding disciples. Their martial arts standards weren't too far off. Most of the disciples were willing to face their opponents head-on, and very few of them would use Qinggong to roam. Last time, Zhang Xiaohua's opponent had used the roaming tactic so easily that he was considered a failure. Now that Zhang Xiaohua had used it, many people couldn't understand. However, Zhang Xiaohua's roaming technique was different from others. The Misty School's disciples who used roaming techniques to avoid their opponent's attacks all used Qinggong. Qinggong consumed internal energy, but it was less than the opponent's blindly attacking. Zhang Xiaohua didn't know any internal energy. What he used was the ethereal steps. It was just a type of Qinggong technique and pure footwork. It didn't consume any internal energy at all. The reason why Zhang Xiaohua picked up the ethereal steps again wasn't because his Big Dipper fist was inferior to the mighty King Kong palm. It was because he thought that in the 4 rounds of the second round, he had just taken a bye. He heard from Steward Su that he also had a bye in the second round. Tang Shi's character wasn't good enough to take a bye in the second round. Therefore, Tang Shi should have already gone through 3 rounds of fierce battles. Tang Shi was using an external cultivation technique and wasn't able to regulate his breathing and recover his physical strength. Presumably, he wouldn't be able to recover through punching like himself. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua was certain that Tang Shi's physical strength had been greatly depleted. If he were to go head-to-head with him, due to his strength and fist techniques, he might be at a disadvantage. Since that was the case, he might as well show weakness now and use guerrilla tactics to deplete his physical strength once again. He would then save up enough energy to give him a head-on blow at the second incense stick's time. He believed that it would have a miraculous effect. Zhang Xiaohua's thoughts weren't wrong. Tang Shi attacked for a while and didn't manage to touch a single hair on Zhang Xiaohua's body. He couldn't help but feel dejected. His footsteps became heavy and the wind from his punches also weakened. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua immediately gave up on the ethereal steps and raised his fist to attack. Tang Shi was shocked and hurriedly withdrew his mind and strengthened his attacks. When Zhang Xiaohua saw that Tang Shi's moves were fierce, he immediately executed the ethereal steps. After a few rounds, Tang Shi was exhausted. This exhaustion wasn't just physical strength, it was also mental strength. As for Tang Shi, after the previous 3 matches, he had exhausted all his strength. However, his light body technique wasn't strong, and he didn't have the ethereal steps technique. With just a few steps on the stage, where could he dodge to? In just a few moves, he was immediately forced to a corner of the stage by Zhang Xiaohua. If he didn't exchange blows, he would be forced out of the stage. As a result, Tang Shi could only grit his teeth and risk his life to compete with Zhang Xiaohua. Tang Shi was indeed a genius. At the final juncture, the strength of his fist and the momentum of his moves didn't lose out to Zhang Xiaohua at all. In just a few moves, he forced Zhang Xiaohua to retreat a few steps. However, with the feeling of exchanging blows with Tang Shi earlier, Zhang Xiaohua already knew that Tang Shi was already at the stage of a thief fleeing the building. As long as she put in a little more effort, she would be able to defeat him. Zhang Xiaohua's spirit rose. Her fists were like raindrops hitting banana leaves. Tang Shi could only parry and had no strength to fight back. But even in this storm-like attack, Tang Shi was still tenacious. No matter how much strength Zhang Xiaohua exerted or how she attacked, he only focused on parrying and quietly waited for the final moment to arrive. Tang Shi wasn't in a hurry, but Zhang Xiaohua was naturally anxious. He didn't want to repeat the same mistake and be eliminated with a draw. So he took a deep breath and attacked even harder. His fists hit the places where Tang Shi had to parry. Step by step, he forced him to the edge of the stage. Tang Shi's back was facing the stage. Although he couldn't see the scene behind him, he had retreated a lot and had a rough idea. Moreover, there were many Tang Shi's fellow apprentices below the stage. From time to time, someone would remind him, "You can't push anymore. You will be forced out in 4 or 5 steps." Tang Shi might dodge, but Zhang Xiaohua was determined this time. He didn't give him any chance to dodge, and he didn't have any more strength in his body. It was already very strenuous to parry Zhang Xiaohua's fists, let alone force him to retreat. Seeing that he was at the edge of the stage, Zhang Xiaohua was secretly happy. He gathered all the strength in his body and shouted, "You can go down now." As he spoke, he used all the strength in his body to punch Tang Shi's chest. "Please collect, thank you." Chapter 185. Just as Zhang Xiaohua's fist was about to hit Tang Shi's body, no matter if Tang Shi raised his hand to meet it or if Zhang Xiaohua hit his body, Tang Shi would inevitably be knocked out of the ring by Zhang Xiaohua. But looking at Zhang Xiaohua's punch that was sure to succeed in one battle, Tang Shi actually calmed down and raised his right fist to meet it. But when the two fists collided, he suddenly changed his fist into a palm. Using his right palm to meet Zhang Xiaohua's fist, he leaned to one side and used all the strength in his body to grab Zhang Xiaohua's fist. Taking advantage of the momentum, Zhang Xiaohua's body involuntarily rushed past Tang Shi's side and straight out of the ring. Wasn't this the same technique that Nye Little Fool had used on Zhang Xiaohua back then? This technique of 4 ounces deflects 1,000 caddies was quite effective against opponents with greater strength than him. However, it was also a relatively advanced technique. Because Tang Shi's strength was great, when he fought with internal experts, he often encountered situations where he was called by others. Thus, as he fought, he got used to it. He also had some experience with this technique, but after all, his internal strength wasn't very deep, and his use of internal strength was far less flexible than others. Thus, although he knew how to use it, he had never actually used it, and he also didn't expect to have the opportunity to practice it. After all, in the Misty School's Kitty Hawk Hall, no one had more strength than him, so it wasn't worth him calling. But today, he met Zhang Xiaohua, who actually had the same strength as him. In the 4th round of the competition, his strength was almost exhausted, but Zhang Xiaohua still had strength. In the end, she actually forced him into a corner. It was Zhang Xiaohua's last punch that instantly made him remember this technique that he had never practiced before. Thus, Tang Shi also treated a dead horse as a living horse. He turned around and used the method that others often used against him on Zhang Xiaohua. Unfortunately, Zhang Xiaohua was also inexperienced and fell for the trick. When his body was pulled to Tang Shi's side, he shouted in his heart, "Aya, I've been tricked." But at this time, he wanted to stabilize his body, but it was already impossible. The two of them used their strength together, just like how Zhang Xiaohua and Tang Shi pushed Zhang Xiaohua together, pushing him out of the arena. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua pass by his side, Tang Shi hurriedly let go of his hand and retracted his arm. His eyes could not help but follow his arm as it left Zhang Xiaohua's figure. In his heart, since Zhang Xiaohua had gone up the escalator, her qinggong was not as good as his. Since her figure had already left the arena, how could she come back? Even if Zhang Xiaohua's qinggong was top-notch, once he left the arena, there would be no place for him to borrow strength. How could he return from outside the arena? But just as he turned his head, before he could turn around, he heard a cry of surprise from behind, "Be careful." Tang Shi hurriedly turned his head back, but did not see any abnormality. In the empty area of the arena, there was no trace of Zhang Xiaohua. His heart was set, and just as he was about to cup his fist to the people below the arena, he felt a huge force coming from his shoulder. He could no longer control his body and rushed out from the place where Zhang Xiaohua had rushed out of the arena. Tang Shi fell out of the arena and only slightly adjusted his unbalanced body in the air before he immediately stood on the ground below the arena. When he turned back to look at the arena again, Zhang Xiaohua, who should have been pushed off the arena by him, was standing steadily on the arena and happily cupping his fist to the people below the arena to thank him. Tang Shi's face was filled with confusion. In fact, just as Tang Shi had pushed Zhang Xiaohua off the arena, Zhang Xiaohua's figure had already left the edge of the arena. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua was regretting that she had been tricked. Her mind was spinning nonstop, trying to salvage the situation. But she did not know Qinggong at all, so how could she turn back in the air? But at this critical juncture, Zhang Xiaohua immediately thought of the floating technique of the third level of the ethereal steps. That day, when she was thrown out of the arena by leader Chong, there was already a tendency for her to float. If she did not use it now, when would she? Therefore, thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua immediately followed the instructions of the cultivation technique and circulated the qi in her meridians. At this time, the cultivation technique followed the person. The moment Zhang Xiaohua's figure left the arena, her figure actually floated up. Immediately, Zhang Xiaohua immediately used her qi to propel her body and used the ethereal steps. Her entire body was like a spinning top, taking advantage of the opportunity to eliminate the force of her body rushing out. She also took the opportunity to change the direction of her body and floated to the inside of the arena, landing on the other side of Tang Shi. At this time, in the eyes of the people below the arena, Zhang Xiaohua's figure did not leave the arena. It was just that her feet used some unknown method to borrow the force of the rotation on the arena to change the direction of the force, causing the crowd to immediately cry out in alarm. By the time Tang Shi turned around, Zhang Xiaohua had already rotated to the air behind Tang Shi. Borrowing the force of the rotation, Zhang Xiaohua kicked towards Tang Shi's shoulder. At this moment, Tang Shi was unguarded and was kicked, resulting in the scene of Tang Shi falling off the arena. When Tang Shi landed, he raised his head and looked at Zhang Xiaohua on the arena in confusion. The half-incense stick below the arena had just finished burning. Second brother, it's strange if you didn't mention red braised meat. I wouldn't have thought of it. Furthermore, it has been a long time since I liked to eat meat as much as I did before. However, now that you mention it, I really miss that tempting taste. Zhang Xiaohu smiled slightly and said, "It's a pity that this is not the Guozhuang house and I can't make red braised meat for you at any time. If we were at home, perhaps mother would make it for you." Speaking of their parents in the Guozhuang house, the two of them were a little sad. However, Zhang Xiaohu forced a smile and said, "After this martial arts exhibition, let's find a chance to go back and take a look. We've been out for more than a year. It's time to go out and take a look." Zhang Xiaohua also nodded and said, "All right, it's decided then. All right, I wonder how Captain He is doing with his ethereal steps. He didn't come to watch me compete today." Zhang Xiaohu patted his shoulder and said, "Then why don't we go and take a look? You also have the pharmacy hall's token now. If we don't use it now, when will we?" Thinking of the pharmacy hall, Zhang Xiaohua smiled and touched the token in her bosom and said, "I also have the same intention. If we don't use the token, it will expire and become invalid. If their hall master takes it back, we won't be able to go even if we want to." After the two brothers finished their discussion, they walked all the way to the pharmacy hall. If the martial arts exhibition was compared to a festival, this lively festival had already come to an end. The Misty School disciples who had enjoyed the festival's hustle and bustle were still excited. They could be seen in groups of 2s and 3s, or in groups gathering together. Some were whispering, some had excited expressions, and some were competing in a circle. The Misty School didn't forbid the disciples from competing, but this kind of competition had to be carried out in the practice room. Only during the martial arts exhibition was the time when the disciples were allowed to exchange pointers in the open space to deepen their understanding of the competition. Zhang Xiaohua and her brother walked all the way. Whenever they came across a place where people were exchanging pointers, they would stop with interest and stand outside to watch the excitement. Sometimes, when they saw something exciting, they couldn't help but clap and cheer, attracting the attention of others. However, how could Zhang Xiaohua be interested in looking at other people's faces? Fortunately, Zhang Xiaohua was still young. so it was more than enough for her to pretend to be a disciple of fledgling Hall. Presumably, Zhang Xiaohua thought in her heart, "You may not remember my face anyway, so I'll leave this disdain and contempt to fledgling Hall." Along the way, the small arenas that were commonly seen a few days ago were also removed. The joys and sorrows left to the disciples on the arenas had become memories. A trace of understanding rose in Zhang Xiaohua's heart. The world was like floating clouds. No matter how noisy it was, no matter how prosperous it was, there would always be a moment when it passed. What was left? How much was left? Even when they approached the pharmacy hall, Zhang Xiaohua was still stuck in that moment of enlightenment. Zhang Xiaohu felt Zhang Xiaohu's abnormality and asked with some worry, "Xiaohua, why aren't you saying anything? Are you tired? Why don't we go back to my place to rest?" Zhang Xiaohu's ordinary and faint words of concern instantly put an end to Zhang Xiaohua's enlightenment. A warm current rose in Zhang Xiaohua's heart. At the same time, Zhang Xiaohua also felt a kacha sound coming from somewhere in her mind, as if she had broken free from some kind of restraint. Zhang Xiaohua felt a great sense of freedom. Yes, perhaps the world was like clouds and unpredictable, but the worry, concern of those close to you, no matter what kind of environment, whether you cared about it or not, were real. It gave you a safe reliance and accompanied you on the road of life. On this ordinary afternoon, on this ordinary journey, why would Zhang Xiaohu think so much? After he finished asking, Zhang Xiaohua raised her head and said with a faint smile, "Second brother, don't worry. I'm just thinking about some things. I'm not tired. Let's go. Let's hurry into the pharmacy hall. I can't help but want to see Captain He's progress." Zhang Xiaohua was still Zhang Xiaohua, and her smile was still so cute. However, in Zhang Xiaohu's eyes, this younger brother of his was a little different. What exactly was it? He couldn't tell. It seemed like he had grown up and matured a little. Or maybe his aura had changed a little. Gradually, he started to have the feeling of looking up to a tall mountain. Zhang Xiaohu couldn't tell. This was because Zhang Xiaohua was transforming bit by bit, without anyone noticing. There was still a guard at the entrance of the pharmacy hall, but it wasn't the one they saw last time. Zhang Xiaohu took out his waist token and Zhang Xiaohua showed it. The guard carefully checked the token for a long time before letting them in. After the two entered, they didn't know where to find He Tianqiu. Should they go to his room or directly to the technique practicing room? Zhang Xiaohua pondered for a moment before saying to Zhang Xiaohu, "This ethereal steps was personally bestowed by sect leader O. He clearly said that it can't be taught to anyone privately. I believe Captain he can't openly practice it in the technique practicing room. I reckon he's still practicing alone in his residence." Zhang Xiaohu felt that it made sense. Following his memory, he found He Tianqiu's residence. Zhang Xiaohua still understood He Tianqiu. With He Tianqiu's cautiousness, why would he practice in a crowded place? He would feel uncomfortable hiding in his own residence. So, while I was comprehending the secret manual, I forced myself to think according to the footwork you used. But it was just like this that made me exhausted and puzzled. If I were to think according to the footwork you used, not only would I not be able to take a step further and comprehend more things, even the footwork I comprehended would be full of mistakes. He Tianqiu licked his chapped lips and continued, "But if I were to abandon your train of thought and rely on my own comprehension, I wouldn't be able to take a step further. This makes things difficult for me." Then, he looked at Zhang Xiaohua and said with some embarrassment, "Moreover, Zhang Xiaohua, your ethereal steps was imparted to you by me, but I didn't expect you to comprehend more than me. Tell me, isn't this making me angry?" So, when Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she was happy. She had just taught her second brother a lesson and built up his self-confidence. Now, she had to teach a cheap master who was defeated by her own cultivation speed. Sigh. Misfortunes never come singly? It seemed like she had to cultivate slowly. If she wasn't careful, she would hurt the self-esteem of a group of people. This was a responsibility that she couldn't bear. Zhang Xiaohua was only a teenager. To be able to persuade her second brother and let him realize his situation was already commendable. How could she have any words to persuade He Tianqiu? This really made things difficult for him. After thinking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua asked, "Captain He, This ethereal steps is one of the divine skills of your Misty School, right? He Tianshu looked at Zhang Xiaohua and said, asking the obvious, that's for sure. Chapter 186. Zhang Xiaohua immediately asked, then do you think there would be any mistakes in this secret manual? He Tianshu hesitated for a moment before replying, it shouldn't be. Even if there are some mistakes, it wouldn't be as full of mistakes as when you executed it. Zhang Xiaohua clapped her hands and said, that's right. Captain He, if there were any mistakes in the ethereal steps technique, then how did Sect Leader O and the rest succeed in cultivating it? If it's just a few pieces of paper that recorded it wrongly, the possibility isn't very high. After all, you've also practiced quite a bit. He Tianshu was still puzzled and asked, but why did you execute it differently from this footwork? Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and said, Captain He, what do you think of my martial arts foundation? He Tianshu laughed and said, what foundation do you have? You have nothing. Zhang Xiaohua immediately asked, then what about your martial arts foundation compared to mine? He Tianshu gave Zhang Xiaohua a sideways glance and said, what are you trying to say? How can your martial arts foundation be compared to mine? It's like the difference between heaven and earth. Zhang Xiaohua smiled apologetically and said, don't worry. Since you know that your foundation is better than mine, then you must also know that when I read this secret manual, I was simply blindly reading it. It was only after you taught me the first level that I was able to understand this secret manual. The reason I was able to use it was purely because I figured it out myself. I definitely couldn't completely follow what was recorded in the secret manual. I used it to the extent that I could, and it wasn't a copy of the secret manual at all. You are different from me. The ethereal steps recorded in this secret manual is tailor-made for a Misty School elite like you. If you were to comprehend it according to my Wild Fox Sin, it would definitely go against what was recorded in the secret manual. How could you succeed in comprehending it? When He Tianshu heard this, his eyes unconsciously lit up as he nodded slightly. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua continued, Captain He, let's talk about it in depth. Did you see that I was able to completely execute the second level of the ethereal steps in the arena, and you still have a lot to comprehend? Did you feel uncomfortable in your heart? When He Tianshu heard this, he blushed and shook his head in denial. No, there's no such thing. When Zhang Xiaohu heard this, he couldn't help but think of himself and shake his head. Zhang Xiaohua didn't refute him. She only said, actually, Captain He, although the ancients have a good saying, there's 100 years of learning, and the one who reaches the top is the teacher. But think about how embarrassing it was when I was learning the fist art. You don't have to be so jealous of me just because I have a little bit of achievement in ethereal steps. When He Tianshu heard this, he slapped Zhang Xiaohua's head and said with a smile, little fella, I'm not jealous of you. I just feel that Sect Leader O asked me to teach you a movement technique, but I haven't learned it yet. I feel that I've let him down. Zhang Xiaohu also spoke up from the side. He said solemnly, Martial Uncle He, I know that if one blindly studies the cultivation of the inner force cultivation technique and goes into a dead end, it's very easy to go berserk. But I wonder if the cultivation of the movement technique is the same? This sentence was like a heavy hammer that smashed into He Tianshu's heart. His expression immediately turned serious as he said, Zhang Xiaohu, you're right. It's not just the inner force cultivation technique. It's the same for the cultivation of other martial arts. The most taboo in martial arts is to walk into a dead end. Not only is it easy to create a bottleneck, it's very easy to go berserk and be unable to extricate oneself. Is this the legendary hero from the youth? Quick, tell me how you passed the test. Zhang Xiaohua was annoyed that he laughed at her and refused to say anything. He Tianshu could only look at Zhang Xiaohu for help. Zhang Xiaohu couldn't stand his sad eyes. After a while, he couldn't take it anymore and told him everything that happened in the arena today. When he heard that Zhang Xiaohua used different methods to pass and even had a free pass, He Tianshu yelled that the heavens were unfair. Why didn't he encounter such a good thing in the past? When Zhang Xiaohua asked He Tianshu how he passed the second round in the past, he stammered and refused to say clearly. In the end, he was forced to say it out helplessly. However, he was kicked off the arena in the first round. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but laugh loudly. Although He Tianshu was ridiculing Zhang Xiaohua for being able to pass like this, but after all, she was a disciple that he taught himself. He Tianshu was also happy. Thinking that he still had to challenge the second-level commoner disciple tomorrow, He Tianshu carefully explained some details and then urged Zhang Xiaohua to rest early so that she could recover her energy and strength to face tomorrow's healthy battle. Although Zhang Xiaohua didn't have any expectations for tomorrow's challenge, it was still a competition after all. She couldn't not be serious, so she didn't dare to be negligent. She went to the medicine hall's guest room early and closed the door to rest. It was still early at this time. Normally, Zhang Xiaohua would be reading books about medicinal herbs. Although this guest room was the medicine hall's, there weren't any books about medicinal herbs. Zhang Xiaohua wasn't used to it and walked left and right. Suddenly, she thought of the Carefree Heart Sutra in her arms. Ever since this book was taken out from the Misty School's library, she had only familiarized herself with the first level of the cultivation technique. When Openg, Shui Yuping, Aunt Qin, and the others saw that the young disciples were so energetic and had good results, they were all full of smiles and nodded their heads frequently. The other members of the Misty Six Tigers, as well as the Hall Master of the Divine Machine Hall, would occasionally lower their heads and say something to the disciples below. They must have taken a fancy to the aptitude of these young disciples and wanted to recruit them into the hall. After the first round of challenges ended, the second round began. The situation in the 5 arenas was basically the same as the previous round. Except for the 5th arena, the other challengers were all at an advantage. Thinking about it, the challengers were all ranked at the top. If they couldn't win, then it wouldn't make any sense. Perhaps there would be some suspense for the challengers at the bottom. While everyone was thinking, the time for 3 incense sticks of time was up. It was still the 5th stage's challenger, number 59, who lost. At this time, the disciples in front of the 5th arena gradually lost their curiosity. Contestant number 50 had already been defeated. Contestant number 250, even if he was strong, probably couldn't beat contestant number 50. Even if he was lucky enough to enter the 3rd stage, if he couldn't provide any surprises, what was the point of looking at him? However, since they had already missed the exciting battles on the other stages, there was still one more battle on the 5th stage. Everyone would make do and watch to see what kind of superhuman number 250. On the 5th stage, the 2nd stage disciples who were waiting to challenge had already jumped onto the stage. Number 250, Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu, who had a ladder on his back, were squeezing through the crowd and overcoming all difficulties to get onto the stage. At this time, a disciple flew into the reed mat shelter and walked to Zhang Chengyue. He lowered his head and said something. Zhang Chengyue's face changed greatly. With a gloomy face, he waved his hand and let the disciple go. He thought for a moment, then quickly walked to Openg's side and whispered a few words in his ear. Openg did the same. His face darkened for a moment, then returned to normal. He frowned deeply and then said a few words to Zhang Chengyue. Zhang Chengyue nodded and quickly walked out of the reed mat shelter. He jumped onto the 1st stage and said loudly, "Disciples, our Misty School has guests from afar. Let's end the martial arts exhibition here. After we send off the guests, let's continue the competition." Of the 5 stages, other than Zhang Xiaohua, the other 4 had just jumped onto the stage and could only jump back down. Zhang Xiaohua was squeezing her way forward. She stopped and smiled at Zhang Xiaohu and said, "Second brother, let's go back. It's a good thing you said it early. If you waited until I was halfway up, wouldn't it waste my energy?" At this moment, Zhang Chengyue waved his hand towards a certain direction and made a gesture. 9 consecutive bell tolls could be heard. It was the bell used by the ethereal sect to welcome their guests. The disciples in the square were also well trained. They stood by the side obediently, leaving a path from the meeting hall to the outside. Inside the reed mat shelter, Openg heard the sound of the bell. He stood up, looked around, and walked out first. The others followed him and walked out of the square along the path left by the disciples. Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohu had never been in such a situation before. They didn't know where to put their hands and feet. Luckily, He Tianshu had been following behind them. He reached out and pulled them to stand in the middle of the group of disciples. They weren't tall and their positions weren't in the middle. Naturally, they didn't stand out and no one could see anything wrong with them. When Openg and the others left the square, the disciples were still standing with their arms folded. They didn't show any signs of leaving. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Captain He, what's going on?" He Tianshu looked around and whispered in her ear, "I think people from the other sects in Jianghu came to visit. 9 bell tolls is an extremely high standard. I think it's people from the large sects like the Dalan Temple, Fragrance Sect, or the Righteous Alliance. Maybe it's the leader of Wan Jianfeng or the other sections." Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously, "Could it be their leader?" He Tianshu shook his head and said, "I don't think so. If their leader came, the bell wouldn't just be 9 tolls, but 18. This is our Misty School's highest standard for welcoming guests." Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously, "How is the standard for welcoming guests related to the sound of the bell?" He Tianshu smiled bitterly and said, "This rule has been passed down since a long time ago. I don't know the specific meaning behind it. I only know that if a top figure of a top sect is to ring the bell 18 times, the highest standard is 9 times. A top figure of a sect that is on par with our ethereal sect is to ring the bell 6 times or 3 times. A normal sect is to ring the bell 6 times or 3 times. If the leader of a sect comes, the bell tolls won't be used." Zhang Xiaohua nodded and seemed to understand. In short, the bell tolls are used to differentiate the status of the guests and show respect. "But why isn't it 10 or 20? He Tianshu said, "Didn't I tell you? This is a rule passed down from a long time ago. As for why it's 9 tolls and not 10, I don't know either. Besides..." At this point, He Tianshu paused for a moment. He looked a little hesitant as he said, "During the martial arts exhibition, our Misty sect will not receive any visitors. This is a rule that everyone in the Jianghu knows. But why did a distinguished guest come to visit us today? Is there some other meaning behind this?" If they were to fall out with Monk Changgung now, the ethereal sect would be facing an unprecedented calamity if their trump card was exposed. Thinking of this, Openg asked again, "Then what are the rules for the other disciples' matches?" Changgung chuckled and said, "Let's see how the younger generation matches up first. How about that?" Openg nodded and said, "I'll follow the master's instructions." Then, he instructed Zhang Chengyue, according to the master's instructions, "Go and make the arrangements." After Zhang Chengyue saluted, he said to the group of young monks behind him, "Disciples who want to participate in our sect's level 1 cotton robe challenge, please follow me." As soon as he finished speaking, 3 young monks walked out from the group of young monks. They looked to be around 10 years old, which was the same age as the Misty School's disciples. Looking at the situation, Changgung must have already made arrangements. Zhang Chengyue couldn't help but think, "It seems like this bald donkey came prepared. The remaining disciples of the Misty School are going to make a fool of themselves." Although the rules had been set that there couldn't be any casualties, the possibility of an accident happening in the match was too high. If there was a mistake, it would only be considered a failure and they would be severely punished. What kind of punishment was this severe punishment? It didn't seem like it was explicitly stated just now. Even if there weren't any casualties, as long as you were thrown off the arena in a sorry state, not only the disciples themselves, but even the Misty School's reputation would be lost. Zhang Chengyue led the 3 young monks to the front of the arena and said, "Young masters, there are 5 arenas. There are 5 matches for the Misty School's disciples. You can choose any one of them." After saying that, he floated onto the arena and used his inner strength to explain the rules of the match to the disciples in the square. If it were any other day, Zhang Chengyue's words would definitely cause a commotion. However, there were outsiders present now. It was obvious that they were here to cause trouble. The disciples already had a common hatred, so why would they break the rules? Seeing that the disciples weren't as noisy as he expected, Zhang Chengyue nodded and said, "Let's invite the disciples of the 5 arenas who are ready to challenge the Misty School's disciples to come up." After saying that, 3 bald monks jumped up from the arena and somersaulted a few times before landing on arenas number 1, number 4, and number 5. Seeing that the 3 monks were standing still, the disciples of number 2 and number 3 also floated onto the arena. When these people stood on the arena, 4 figures flew out from the crowd and landed on arenas number 1 to number 4. These 4 figures seemed to be showing off their lightness skills, but also seemed to be deliberately provoking them. Their figures flew high and fluttered, causing a burst of cheers from below the arena. In fact, if these 4 disciples' lightness skills were good, it might not be so. It was just that they looked better than the bald monks on the arena, so naturally they would be cheered. Moreover, the Misty School was known for its lightness skills. It was better than the Dalan Temple, so it could be considered as taking the lead and suppressing the monks in terms of momentum. Zhang Chengyue stood on the first arena and smiled at the disciple in front of him. The disciple had a simple and honest face, thick limbs, and a small face, but was almost as tall as him. He asked, "Number 12, what's your name?" Number 12 replied in a muffled voice, "I'm young Eagle Cousin's disciple, Tang Shi." When Zhang Chengyue heard this, he nodded and said, "Good, Tang Shi. I'll remember your name. Are you ready?" Tang Shi nodded. His figure left a few blurry afterimages in the air. His qigong was actually extremely brilliant. Zhang Xiaohua secretly knew that it was not good. She said, "You little monk, you actually cheated." As soon as her words fell, Yuan Liao had already closed in. His hands were like playing a pipa. He waved his fingers and pointed at all the acupoints on Zhang Xiaohua's body. In just one move, he had sealed 36 major acupoints on Zhang Xiaohua's body. Then, Yuan Liao's figure flashed, and he appeared behind Zhang Xiaohua. He stood tall with his hands behind his back and looked at the crowded heads under the arena with a lonely face. At that time, the bald little monk Yuan Liao, wearing clothes whiter than snow, floated at the edge of the arena. The only thing missing was a swaying fan, and it would be even more perfect. His charm was comparable to that of a talented scholar. He was simply the legendary jade tree facing the wind. In fact, one could not help but say that Yuan Liao was showing off. He had the ability to show off. Not to mention how divine his body was. Just this exquisite technique of sealing acupoints was something that few of the Misty School's commoners could compare to. As everyone knew, the technique of sealing acupoints required internal energy to be injected into the body's acupoints in order to produce an effect. If one could condense their internal energy into the size of a needle, without 10 years of hard practice, it was simply impossible to achieve. In the Misty School, only the commoner 4th-rank disciples, whose internal energy cultivation had reached a certain level, would pass the internal energy assessment and be taught according to the circumstances. This was also the reason why Zhang Xiaohua had never encountered an acupoint sealing technique in the commoner 1st-rank competition. The ethereal sect also had some talented disciples who were able to reach the standard of the acupoint sealing technique when they were at the 3rd rank of commoner clothes.